You stopped my line for a $2 bolt? Brent Calloway's voice cracked across line 4 as the emergency lights blinked red over Mason Reed's oil-stained shirt. Mason stood still beside his dented red toolbox, his name badge twisted where Brent had just yanked it. Behind the visitor line, 9-year-old Eli lifted the cracked bolt in both hands, its tiny split catching the fluorescent light. Douglas Pritchard smiled tightly under the Safety First banner. "Control the floor," he said. Grace Hollander, silent at the edge of the crowd, watched Mason wrap the bolt in a clean rag. Eli whispered, "Daddy, it's broken inside." 3 hours earlier, the factory still sounded normal to everyone except Mason Reed. Harla McBride Assembly woke before sunrise with its usual rhythm. Conveyors clicking, air hoses sighing, steel frames rolling forward beneath white lights that hummed like tired insects. The smell of cutting oil hung low over line 4, mixed with hot rubber, coffee, and the faint dust of cardboard boxes stacked too close to the parts cage. Mason moved through it all with a slow, practiced quiet, gray work shirt tucked in, sleeves rolled to the forearm, steel-toe boots scuffed white along the edges. He had been listening since 5:12 that morning. Not with fear, not with drama, with the kind of attention that came from years of fixing machines before they hurt people. Every 43 seconds, beneath the regular clatter of the line, there was a low knock from the rear suspension cradle, soft enough for most men to ignore and wrong enough for Mason to remember. He paused beside a frame lift, laid 2 fingers against the painted steel, and felt the vibration pass through his hand like a warning whispered through bone. Noah Brooks stood 2 stations down, thin shoulders tucked inside an oversized trainee vest, trying to look invisible while he sorted fasteners from a blue bin. Mason noticed the boy's hands. Too quick. Too nervous. "Slow is smooth," Mason said quietly. Noah looked up, startled. "Mr. Reed, I'm not behind." "Didn't say you were." Mason nodded toward the bin. "Just don't let the line teach you fear. Fear makes people skip steps." Noah swallowed and gave a small nod. At the visitor walkway, Eli pressed his palms against the rail, proud and half asleep, wearing a paper badge that said Family Safety Walkthrough in block letters. Mason had brought him because the school had a delayed start and because Eli liked machines, not the loud parts, but the way they fit together when people respected them. Mason lifted 2 fingers in a small wave. Eli smiled back, then pointed toward the cradle lift as if he had heard something too. Brent arrived with his clipboard and polished boots, smiling for the visitors before his eyes settled coldly on Mason. "Reed, we need this line clean for the quarterly walkthrough."
No slowdowns. No personal cruzadas.
Mason did not answer right away. He reached into the parts bin, picked up 1 bolt, then another. The 3rd one felt wrong before he saw it. Too light in the fingers, too dull at the threads. Under the glare of the overhead light, a hairline crack ran from the center outward, almost beautiful in how dangerous it was. Mason turned it slowly. The stamped code read M4-17B, but the final letter sat shallow and crooked, like it had been pressed by a hand trying to imitate a machine. Farther down the aisle, a woman in a navy coat, Grace Hollander, paused beside Douglas Pritchard without speaking. She looked like insurance. She watched like something else. Mason placed the bolt on his palm and stepped toward the emergency stop. Brent saw him move. "Don't you dare." Mason looked once at Noah, once at Eli behind the line, and then at the workers standing beneath the cradle lift. His voice stayed low. "Everybody clear the load zone." Brent laughed, but Mason pulled the red handle anyway. The whole line shuddered into silence, and as men turned to stare, Mason saw Brent's boot nudge a blue bolt box beneath the parts table, where a torn strip of red warning adhesive still clung to the cardboard. The torn red adhesive on the blue box disappeared under Brent Calloway's boot so quickly that most people only saw him step closer to Mason, smiling like a man restoring order. The conveyor lights blinked in a slow red pulse. The workers stood frozen around line 4, some with gloves still raised, some looking toward Douglas Pritchard as if permission to breathe came from the office windows above. Brent lifted the cracked bolt from Mason's rag with 2 fingers, holding it away from himself like something dirty. "This is what stopped us?" he asked. Douglas gave a soft, practiced sigh. Mason, we understand pressure at home can affect judgment. Mason's jaw tightened, but he did not look at Eli. He knew his son was watching. That bolt came from the load bin, Mason said. Then we'll document it, Douglas replied, smooth as wax. But you don't get to turn a safety walkthrough into a personal episode. A few people shifted. One man near Station 12 looked at Mason's stained sleeves. Then away. Someone whispered, not quietly enough. He's been off since his wife died. Another voice murmured, single dad. Bills piling up? Maybe he snapped. The words didn't hit loud. They hit low, like cold water seeping into a boot. Mason wiped his palms on his work pants. More to keep them still than clean. The smell of hot metal hung in the silence left by the stopped line. Behind the visitor rail, Eli clutched the red toolbox handle with both hands, his knuckles pale, the paper badge on his chest bent at one corner. Grace Hollander watched all of it without moving. She didn't step forward. She didn't rescue him. Her eyes traveled instead from the crooked M4-17B mark on the bolt to the blue box half hidden beneath the parts table. Then to Brent's boot still planted too firmly in front of it. Let's take this upstairs, Douglas said. Not necessary, Brent answered too fast. We already know what happened. Do we? Grace asked quietly. It was the first thing she had said since the line stopped. Douglas turned toward her with his public smile. Ms. Hollander, I assure you, Harlan McBride takes safety very seriously. He touched the plastic visitor badge clipped to his jacket, as if the word safety itself were a credential. This is a family factory. We protect jobs here. We don't encourage panic. Mason heard the word family and looked at Eli before he could stop himself. That tiny glance was all Brent needed. Exactly, Brent said, lowering his voice into something almost kind. Mason has a lot on his plate. Nobody's blaming him for being emotional. Then he turned, gestured sharply at Noah Brooks. Bring the trainee in. Noah stepped forward from Station 9, face white under the fluorescent lights. His oversized yellow vest hung crooked on his shoulders. He looked 19 and younger than that. Brent laid a form on the rolling inspection cart and clicked a pen. Simple process, Noah. You confirm installation error, we correct the report, and nobody makes this bigger than it has to be. Noah stared at the paper. Mason saw the title before the boy did. Trainee installation error. Under it was the lot number M4-17B. The same as the cracked bolt. The same as the line Mason had just stopped. He didn't install that section, Mason said. Brent didn't even turn. You are no longer assigned to this line. He didn't install it. Mason, Douglas said, patient and soft. You've already disrupted production. Please don't interfere with internal procedure. Mason took one step, slow enough not to startle the guard who had moved near his elbow. He didn't reach for the paper. He didn't raise his voice. He only placed himself where Noah could see him clearly. Don't sign something you haven't read. Noah's hand trembled over the pen. Mr. Reed, they said if I don't cooperate. Read first, Mason said. Breathe second. Sign last if it's true. The room behind the glass seemed colder than the factory floor. Douglas's office lights reflected in the inspection cart, turning the steel surface into a pale mirror of everyone's faces. Eli was kept outside by the visitor rail, safe but close enough to see adults deciding what his father was allowed to be. Brent leaned over Noah's shoulder and tapped the signature line. It's just paperwork. Grace's eyes narrowed at that. Not at Mason. At Brent. Mason glanced toward the service tablet mounted beside the station, still glowing from the interrupted cycle. For half a second before the screen dimmed, a red line blinked beneath the morning torque record. Hold lot M4-17B. Material variance. Then Brent reached past Noah, tapped the tablet, and the screen went black. The service tablet went black so suddenly that its reflection vanished from Noah Brooks's eyes. For one small second, the boy looked as if someone had turned off the only light he had been trying to follow. Brent Calloway slid the tablet back against the mount and smiled with all his teeth. Professional again. Calm again. the kind of calm that made fear look unreasonable. System refresh, he said. Happens all the time. Mason Reed said nothing. He only looked at the blank screen, then at Noah's shaking hand, then down at the inspection form waiting for a signature. The pen had rolled to the edge of the cart. It clicked once against the metal lip and stopped there, balanced between falling and staying. Take him to the locker hall, Douglas Pritchard told the guard, nodding toward Mason like he was moving a piece off a board. We'll handle the trainee internally. No, Mason said, not loud, not angry, just heavy enough that the guard paused. Brent's smile thinned. You don't get to say no anymore. Mason turned his body slightly, putting himself between Noah and the form without touching either one. Then I'll say it quietly. The factory beyond the glass stayed frozen in red emergency light, Line 4 sitting still like a giant holding its breath. Eli stood behind the visitor rail, both hands wrapped around the handle of Mason's dented red toolbox. The toolbox was almost too heavy for him, but he would not set it down. His lower lip trembled once, and he pressed it flat the way children do when they are trying to be brave for a parent who is already being hurt. Mason saw it and softened his face for him. Just a little. Enough to tell the boy not to be afraid yet. In the locker hall, the air was colder and smelled of wet concrete, old coffee, and the sharp soap from the hand-wash station. A vending machine hummed by the far wall. Someone had taped a faded poster over the time clock that read "Safety starts with you." The corners curling like the factory itself had stopped believing it. Douglas handed Mason a white envelope. "Separation paperwork," he said gently, as if gentleness could make the words clean. "Your quarterly bonus is forfeited pending review. Benefits continue for 30 days. Eli heard that. Mason wished he had not. The boy lowered the toolbox to the floor and stared at the envelope like it was a bill from a hospital. Mason slipped it into his back pocket without opening it. There were things a father could fall apart over later. Not here. Not in front of a frightened kid and a frightened trainee. Noah stood near the lockers, his trainee vest crooked, the unsigned form folded in one hand like contraband. "Mr. Reed," he whispered. "If I don't sign, they said it follows me. They said no one hires a troublemaker." Mason reached into his lunch bag and took out the last bottle of water, the one he had packed for Eli after the walkthrough. He held it out to Noah. "Drink." Noah blinked. "What?" "Your hands are shaking. Drink first." Brent gave a short laugh from the doorway. "That's sweet, Mason. Very fatherly. Doesn't change the report." Mason ignored him. Noah took the bottle with both hands. The cap cracked open too loudly in the hall. Mason unfolded the form, read the first line, and saw how neatly the lie had been built. Trainee installation error, improper torque, supervisor notified after stoppage. He tore the unsigned copy once down the center, then again, and dropped the pieces into the trash. Brent stepped forward. "You just destroyed company documentation." "No," Mason said. "I destroyed a blank piece of fear." Grace Hollander had stopped at the mouth of the hallway. She was close enough to hear, far enough to look like she was only observing. Her eyes moved from the torn form to Mason's hands. Not shaking, not clenched, just careful. Mason turned back to Noah. "If they hand you another one, you say this exact sentence. I need a safety representative before I sign anything. That's all. No speeches. No guessing. Just that." Noah swallowed, then repeated it under his breath, the words coming out uneven but alive. Eli bent to lift the red toolbox again, and the latch, old and loose, popped open. A small folded repair receipt slipped out and skated across the concrete, stopping against Grace's shoe. She looked down before anyone else did. In Mason's handwriting, half smudged with oil, were the words, "Report vibration if rhythm repeats at 43 seconds. Below it, in smaller print, was the same code from the bolt, M4-17B, and for the first time, Grace Hollander did not look at Mason like a man asking to be believed. She looked at the paper like kindness had just dropped the first key to a locked door. The repair receipt lay against Grace Hollander's shoe for 3 quiet seconds before anyone touched it. In a factory, 3 seconds was nothing, just a breath between cycles. but in that locker hall it stretched long enough for Douglas Pritchard's smile to lose its shape. Mason Reed bent first, not quickly, not like a man trying to hide something. He picked up the paper by one corner, careful not to smear the old oil mark across his own handwriting. "That's mine," he said. Brent Calloway stepped in at once. "A mechanic's note from his toolbox doesn't prove anything." Grace held out her hand. "May I see it?" Mason looked at her visitor badge, then at the paper, then at Eli standing beside the red toolbox with both hands tucked under his arms. He did not know who Grace was. To him, she was another person in a clean coat who might decide that a dirty man was easier to doubt. Still, he placed the receipt in her hand. "It's just a reminder," he said. "I write down sounds before they become failures." Douglas gave a soft laugh meant for the hallway, not for Mason. "And that is exactly the concern, Ms. Hollander. Mr. Reed has a habit of personalizing normal machine behavior." Grace did not answer. She turned the receipt beneath the fluorescent light. The paper was old, creased at the fold, printed from a maintenance kiosk weeks ago. On the back, Mason's pencil marks were plain and tight. Report vibration if rhythm repeats at 43 seconds. Beneath that, M4-17B, rear cradle, load zone. Noah stared at those marks as if they were something he had been afraid to remember. Mason noticed. Brent noticed Mason noticing. "Noah," Brent said too sharply. "Go back to Station 9. Grace's eyes lifted. "I thought the line was stopped." Brent's mouth held still for half a beat. "It is. I mean when we restart." Mason stepped to the small maintenance table near the security door and laid the cracked bolt, still wrapped in clean cloth, under the desk lamp. "I'm not asking anyone to take my word." The lamp buzzed. The light fell hard and white over the metal. He rolled the bolt with one fingertip until the stamped code faced up. M4-17B. The crack was visible now, a thin dark vein running from the center outward. But Mason's eyes were not on the crack. They were on the final letter. The B sat shallow, slightly low, pressed at a different angle from the rest of the code. "This mark doesn't match the die," he said. Douglas folded his hands. "Or it was scuffed in handling." "Maybe." Mason nodded once. "Then the service tablet should show the material hold was cleared." Brent scoffed. "There was no hold." Eli, small behind the open toolbox, whispered, "But the screen was red." No one moved. Mason looked down at his son, not angry, only careful. "You saw the red line?"
Eli nodded.
"Before Mr. Brent made it go dark." The words were childish, simple, and because they were simple, they landed harder than accusation. Douglas's smile returned, thinner now. "Children misunderstand screens. There are many colored alerts." Grace wrote something in the margin of her folder. She still did not defend Mason. She asked instead, "Who can lock a service tablet remotely?" Brent crossed his arms. "Maintenance, admin, production, control. Sometimes IT. It's routine." Mason turned the bolt slightly again. "Then pull the tablet log. We are not turning an internal maintenance refresh into an investigation," Douglas said, still polite. "Ms. Hollander, I can have security export the hallway footage to settle this." Grace looked toward the black dome camera above the locker entrance. "Please do." The security clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and a radio clipped to her belt, was called over. She tapped her device, waited, frowned, tapped again. The hallway filled with the tiny sound of plastic keys clicking under her thumb. "There's an export error," she said. Douglas exhaled as if inconvenienced. "For what window?" 6:02 to 6:18 this morning. Noah's face drained. Mason did not ask why yet. He only looked from the missing camera window to the torn red adhesive on the blue box Brent had kicked under. The parts table, then back to the shallow B on the bolt. Brent shrugged too quickly. That lot was cleared before first shift anyway. Grace's pen stopped moving. Mason looked up slowly, because no one had said out loud that the lot had ever been held. Brent Calloway's last sentence hung in the locker hall like a dropped wrench. That lot was cleared before first shift anyway. Mason Reed did not move for a moment. Neither did Grace Hollander. The hum of the vending machine seemed louder now, and somewhere beyond the glass, Line 4 sat in red-lit silence, a giant body waiting for someone to decide whether it was sick or merely inconvenient. Douglas Pritchard looked at Brent with a smile that warned him to stop helping. "What Mr. Calloway means," Douglas said gently, "is that all materials used on this line go through established channels." Mason looked down at the cracked bolt under the lamp. "Then the channel won't mind being checked." Brent gave a small laugh. "Checked by who?" "You." Mason shook his head. "By the metal." No one spoke after that, not right away. The word sounded foolish until Mason opened his red toolbox and took out 3 plain things. An old torque wrench with tape around the grip, a pocket magnet worn smooth from years of use, and a thread gauge folded like a dull silver fan. They were not impressive tools. They did not shine. They looked like they belonged to a man who had fixed more than he had ever been thanked for. Brent leaned against the inspection cart, arms crossed. "Fine. Let him do his little magic show. Then we restart." Mason looked at Grace, not Brent. "I need 3 bolts pulled at random from the line for bin. Not by me. 1 from sealed stock, same spec, if you have it." Grace waited half a breath, then turned to the security clerk. "Pull them. Photograph the bins first." Brent's expression twitched. "Ms. Hollander, there's no need to formalize a maintenance tantrum." "There is if everyone is confident," Grace said. Her voice stayed even, but something in it made the clerk move. Eli stood behind the visitor line with both hands tucked into his sleeves, watching his father like he was watching a storm decide whether to pass over the house. Mason caught his eye and gave the smallest nod. "Safe. Stay there." Noah Brooks hovered near the lockers, pale and silent, the torn form still half visible in the trash can. Mason did not call him forward. He only said, "Noah can write the numbers if he wants. Numbers don't accuse anyone." Noah swallowed, then stepped close enough to hold a notepad, far enough not to be trapped between adults. That mattered. Mason made sure of it. The first line for bolt went into the vise. Mason set the torque wrench, slow and exact, and pulled until the handle clicked. Nothing happened. Brent smiled. Mason reset the wrench higher, still within the listed range. The bolt snapped with a dry little pop. It was not loud, but every whisper in the hallway stopped. A man near the door who had been dragging a chair let it rest halfway across the floor. Mason placed the broken halves on a clean rag. "One test doesn't prove a lot." He said it before anyone else could. Then he tested the second. Failed lower. The third held longer, but when he passed the magnet under it, the metal caught harder than it should have, a small ugly tug against the palm. Mason laid the stockroom bolt beside them and ran the same test. It held. The magnet barely kissed it. The thread gauge slid clean over the stock bolt, then hesitated at the same shallow point on 2 from M4-17B. Mason did not smile. He did not look at Brent. He simply turned the gauge so Grace could see the uneven bite. "This doesn't say who did it," he said. "It says the trainee didn't make steel change its mind." Noah's shoulders dropped as if someone had loosened a strap around his chest. Eli exhaled, small and shaky, and pressed his forehead briefly to the visitor rail. Grace lowered her folder onto the inspection cart and began taking photos herself now. The snapped bolts, the magnet reading, the crooked final B. Mason's hands kept carefully away from the samples unless she asked. "These are indicators," she said. "Not a final finding." "I know," Mason answered. Brent's face had gone tight beneath the professional calm. "This is exactly how rumors start. A couple of shop floor tricks, and suddenly good people think the company is poisoning them with fasteners." Douglas stepped in quickly. "We'll handle this privately. No need to upset the floor." Then a new voice came from behind them, polished and irritated. "Approved equivalence pass all basic use." Victor Lang stood at the end of the hall in a charcoal jacket too clean for the factory, phone still in his hand, as if he had arrived before anyone had called him. Grace looked at him slowly. "Approved equivalence?" Victor blinked once. Mason watched Noah go white. The boy's fingers moved to the small oil-stained notebook in his vest pocket, and when the edge slipped open, Mason saw 3 words beside a truck plate number that made the hallway feel colder. V. Lang said okay. The words in Noah Brooks's notebook were not written like an accusation. They were small, cramped, and almost apologetic, pressed into the paper as if the boy had hoped making them tiny would make them safer. V. Lang said okay. Beside it was a truck plate number, a timestamp, and the same code that now sat on the rag in broken pieces. M4-17B. Victor Lang slipped his phone into his jacket pocket too quickly. That is a trainee's personal notebook, he said, his voice polished but thinner than before. It has no bearing on approved purchasing. Noah flinched at the word trainee, as if his whole life had been reduced to something disposable. Mason Reed saw it, and for one breath, anger passed across his face like a shadow. He could have used the moment to humiliate Victor. He could have pointed, raised his voice, made the hallway turn on the man in the clean jacket. Instead, Mason placed one hand flat on the inspection cart, steadying himself before steadying anyone else. Noah, he said softly, don't explain fast. Start with what you saw. Grace Hollander looked at Mason then, not with sympathy, with attention. She slid the notebook closer without taking it from Noah's hand. You control your own notes, she said to the boy. Read the line before that one. Noah swallowed. The cap of the water bottle Mason had given him crackled in his grip. Side gate delivery. 6:16 a.m. blue pallets. Red tags removed before tour. The hallway seemed to shrink around those words. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere beyond the doors, an air compressor kicked on, then faded, leaving the silence worse than the noise. Grace opened the yellow folder she had carried all morning. Douglas Pritchard noticed the folder and his smile stiffened, because it was too organized to belong to a casual insurance guest. Inside were printed purchase orders, delivery slips, and a vendor invoice with one letter circled in black ink. Grace placed it beside Noah's notebook. This supplier name is not the certified vendor on file, she said. It is one character different. Victor reached for the paper. Grace moved it back an inch. Not dramatic. Just enough. Mason watched the invoice, not Victor's face. The price column was wrong in a way even a tired man could understand. 37% below the usual cost. The QR code at the bottom had been printed slightly off-center. Grace scanned it with her phone. The screen loaded a parts category for light-duty fixtures, not rear cradle load assemblies. No one spoke. Even Brent Calloway stopped shifting his weight. Mason looked from the invoice to the repair receipt, then to the broken bolt, then toward the glass wall where line 4 waited under red light. The pattern was no longer a feeling. It had weight now. Paper weight. Metal weight. A boy's handwriting weight. If those are in the cradle lift, Mason said, the first failure won't look like a part failure. It'll look like somebody installed it wrong. Noah's eyes closed. That was the trap. Mason knew it. Grace knew it. Douglas knew it too, because he turned toward the door and lowered his voice. We are not doing this in a locker hallway. Ms. Hollander, I suggest we step into my office and let production resume while we sort out paperwork. Grace did not answer him. She looked at Mason. Where would it fail first? Mason took the old repair receipt and, with the stub of a pencil from his shirt pocket, drew a small rectangle for the rear cradle, 2 mounting points, 1 load path. His hand moved with the calm of a man drawing a map out of habit, not performance. Here, he said, tapping one corner. When the line cycles under load, it'll talk every 43 seconds before it gives. Talk, Victor said, trying to laugh. Mason didn't look up. Machines warn people who listen. Douglas's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and for the first time that morning, the professional warmth left his face. A message flashed across the screen before he tilted it away. Restart line 4 for controlled demonstration. Keep tour moving. He locked the phone, but not before Grace saw enough. She closed her folder slowly. Mr. Pritchard, she said, her voice quiet. Are you authorizing a restart while material variance is unresolved? Douglas smoothed his tie. I am authorizing a controlled verification under management supervision. Mason looked through the glass toward Cal and the other workers gathering near the load zone, men who trusted the floor because they had no choice. He folded the repair receipt once, carefully, and handed it to Grace instead of keeping it like a weapon. Then this can't stay in here, he said. And at that moment, the truth had become too heavy for any closed door to hold. The walk back to line 4 felt longer than the hallway had any right to be. Mason Reed did not lead it like a man returning to prove everyone wrong. He walked with his shoulders squared but tired, one hand on the handle of his dented red toolbox, the other hanging open at his side so no one could mistake him for a threat. Grace Hollander followed with the yellow folder pressed against her coat. Noah Brooks beside her, clutching his oil-stained notebook like it might burn through his fingers. Through the glass, workers had gathered beneath the white factory lights, their faces turned upward toward the control platform where Douglas Pritchard stood under the Safety First banner, with Brent Calloway at his shoulder and Victor Lang near the parts cage. The red emergency lights had been switched off. That alone made Mason's stomach tighten. Douglas lifted both hands, calm and fatherly, the way a man lifts his hands when he wants a crowd to believe the room is still under control. "Folks, we've had an unfortunate interruption this morning," he said, voice rolling smoothly over the floor speakers. A respected employee under personal strain raised a concern. "We are reviewing it, but this company cannot allow fear to replace process." Several workers looked at Mason, some with pity, some with doubt, some with the quiet guilt of men who had watched him be shamed and said nothing. Brent stepped forward with the cracked bolt sealed now in Grace's clear evidence bag. "One damaged fastener," he said. "That's what started this. One." Eli, still behind the visitor line and now holding the rail with both hands, whispered, "That's the one I held." Mason looked over just long enough to nod. "Safe. Stay there." Grace did not correct Brent yet. She watched him. That was worse than interrupting. Brent saw the silence and took it for permission. "The trainee handled parts at Station 9, he continued. "The mechanic panicked. We stopped the line. Now we're doing a controlled verification so everybody can see there is no danger." Noah's face tightened at the word trainee. Mason stepped slightly in front of him, not blocking him from truth, only from being used. "Say his name," Mason said. Brent blinked. "What?" "His name is Noah." The words were quiet, but they crossed the floor. For the first time, a few workers turned toward the boy instead of the accusation. Douglas smiled again, thinner. "Noah misunderstood a shipping label. That's all." Grace opened the yellow folder but did not reveal the badge beneath her coat. "Then the records should help him." She placed the repair receipt on the inspection table first, the one from Mason's toolbox, with the words about the 43-second vibration and M4-17B. Then she laid Noah's notebook beside it, not taking her hand off the page until Noah nodded. Last came the purchase invoice, the vendor name circled, the 37% price drop visible beneath the glare. The order was simple enough for anyone watching to follow. Sound, lot, delivery, money. Douglas's voice hardened only at the edges. "Ms. Hollander, with respect, we are not trying a purchasing matter on the production floor." "No," Mason said, looking at the workers under the cradle lift. "We're trying not to bury one under it." The first retention spike came when Victor finally found his footing. He held up his phone, showing a procurement screen with the words approved equivalent highlighted. "This is standard industry substitution," he said. "Same size, same basic use, approved through purchasing." Mr. Reed is turning paperwork language into a safety crisis. A few heads nodded. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like the kind of phrase that kept jobs intact and questions small. Douglas seized it. "Exactly. We protect livelihoods by not overreacting." Then Grace asked, "If it was standard, why was the service tablet locked after the material variance alert?" The nodding stopped. The air conditioner clicked off, and the factory seemed to lose its background breath. Brent shifted, placing his body between Grace and the blue M4-17B bin half covered by a pallet. One worker near Station 12 slowly raised his phone, recording without looking like he was recording. Mason pointed not at Brent, but at the load zone. Move Cal out from under that cradle before you increase load. Douglas looked down at the control operator. Proceed to 30%. The conveyor stirred. Metal woke against metal. Mason heard the low knock return on the first cycle. Then again 43 seconds later, deeper now like a warning coming up through the floor. Grace turned to Douglas, her hand finally touching the inside of her coat. Did you know lot M4-17B had been held? Douglas answered too quickly, too publicly, too proud to retreat. That red tag was removed for a reason. The sentence cracked louder than the machine. Noah lifted his head. I saw who removed it, he said, voice shaking but clear. Brent's face went pale. The control board climbed to 70%. The cradle above Cal gave a dry metallic tick, and Grace's fingers closed around the badge she had not shown yet. The dry metallic tick above Cal's head became a crack before anyone could dress it up as normal machine noise. It split through line 4 with a sound so clean and final that every face turned upward at once. The rear cradle assembly dipped half an inch, then held, trembling against its own weight. Cal looked up from beneath it, confused first, then frightened. Brent Calloway shouted, "Nobody! Touch the controls!" Mason Reed was already moving. Not wild, not angry, fast in the way a man moves when he has spent years imagining the 1 second nobody else believes will come. He crossed the yellow line only after the cradle dropped again, grabbed the emergency stop, and pulled it down with both hands. The conveyor died in a hard shudder. Red lights flashed over steel, glass, faces, Eli's small hands gripping the visitor rail. For one heartbeat, the cradle still sagged. Mason dropped to his knees, snapped open the dented red toolbox, and pulled out a thick steel blocking bar wrapped in an old shop towel. He slid it into the cradle bracket just as the weakened mount gave another ugly groan. Cal, roll left, Mason said.
Cal froza.
Left, Mason repeated, low and firm. Now.
Cal rullat.
The cradle lurched, caught against the blocking bar, and a bolt shot loose, struck the concrete, and broke in two at Mason's boot. Nobody clapped. Nobody screamed. The whole factory seemed to lose its voice. The only sounds left were the emergency alarm fading in pulses, Cal gasping on the floor, and Eli whispering from behind the rail, "Daddy!" Mason did not look for praise. He put one hand on Cal's shoulder and checked his breathing. "You hurt." Cal shook his head, eyes wet, still staring at the place where he had been standing. Mason nodded once, then lifted his hands away from the broken bolt on the floor. "Grace," he said quietly. "Direct sample." That was when Grace Hollander stepped forward and opened her coat. The silver badge flashed under the fluorescent light. Not loud, not theatrical, but final. "Grace Hollander," she said, voice carrying across the silent line. "State Industrial Safety Inspector. Line 4 is locked down as of this moment." Douglas Pritchard's mouth opened, but no sound came. His tie sat crooked now, one hand still near the control platform as if he could smooth the moment back into policy. Grace pointed to the broken fastener near Mason's boot. "Seal that sample. Photograph its position first." The security clerk moved without waiting for Douglas. The phone in the worker's hand near Station 12 was still recording. Brent took one step back from the M4-17B bin, and the pallet he had used to cover it scraped the floor with a small guilty sound. Grace knelt, not touching the bolt, and held Mason's first evidence bag beside it. The cracked bolt Eli had held and the broken bolt from the actual load assembly lay inches apart, both stamped M4-17B, both with the final B shallow and crooked, one warning and one confession. The room saw it together. That was the silence. Not empty silence. Understanding silence. The kind that makes grown men look down at their boots because they know they laughed at the wrong thing. Victor Lang's phone buzzed on the inspection table where he had set it down during the commotion. The screen lit before he could reach it. Grace turned it toward herself just enough to read the preview. Pull red tags before quarterly tour.
Nos shutdown.
Victor's hand hovered in the air, then fell slowly to his side. Brent swallowed so hard it moved in his throat. Douglas tried to recover the polished voice that had carried him through years of closed-door decisions. Inspector, that message is being taken out of context. Grace did not raise her voice. Then the context will be preserved. I'm seizing the restart log, the service tablets, the purchase file, the worker recording, and Mr. Lang's company phone. Mr. Brooks is now a protected witness. No one speaks to him without safety representation present. Noah stared at her, stunned, the notebook pressed to his chest. Mason looked back at him, not smiling, only steady, as if to say the truth had not made him bigger. It had only made him less alone. Eli finally let go of the rail and breathed out. Behind him, the safety first banner fluttered in the draft from the stopped ventilation, its plastic corners ticking softly against the wall. Grace stood and faced the floor. No one in this building will call a human life a $2 problem again. And in the hush that followed, with Mason's name badge still twisted on his shirt and the broken bolt sealed under white factory light, the question became heavier than victory. Now that the truth had finally spoken, what would Mason do with the power of being believed? The first silence had come from shock. The second came a week later, after everyone finally understood what had almost been traded for a quarterly number. Harlan McBride Assembly did not run line for that morning. The conveyors were still, the rear cradle lift was locked out with bright orange tags, and the workers gathered beneath the same safety first banner that no longer looked proud, only overdue. Grace Hollander stood at the inspection table with the yellow folder open, her silver badge clipped where everyone could see it. She did not speak like a hero arriving at the end of a story. She spoke like a person making sure the story could not be buried again. The lot M4-17B had failed load standards. The red tag had been removed without authorization. The certified vendor had been replaced by a look-alike supplier. The restart override had been signed while material variance was unresolved. Victor Lang's company phone, the purchase invoice, the QR code, the service tablet, the worker recording, and the broken bolt from line 4 all told the same truth from different angles. Douglas Pritchard was suspended pending state review. Victor's file was referred for criminal investigation. Brent Calloway was removed from line authority and barred from contact with Noah Brooks. No one cheered. It would have been too small for what had happened. Mason Reed stood near the back with Eli beside him, one hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder, the other holding the old red toolbox. His work shirt had been washed, but the oil had left faint shadows in the fabric that no soap could fully erase. Noah stood beside Grace, not behind her, wearing a clean trainee vest and holding his notebook openly now. When Grace said he was protected under whistleblower procedure, his eyes dropped to the floor, and for a moment he looked 19 again, not accused, not cornered, just young. Mason gave him a small nod. It was not congratulations. It was permission to breathe. Then Grace called Mason forward. The room shifted, boots scraping concrete, men and women making a narrow path where days before they had looked away. Grace held out his name badge. It had been straightened, cleaned, and clipped to a new backing. "Mr. Reed," she said, "your record has been corrected. Your termination is void. Your benefits are reinstated without interruption. Your safety stop is documented as proper action." Mason looked at the badge, then at Eli. The boy's face loosened in relief, the kind that comes when a child does not understand insurance but understands that his father can still come home with his head up. Mason took the badge but did not pin it on yet. "I'll come back," he said, quiet enough that people had to listen. "Under 3 conditions." Grace did not interrupt. The acting plant director, a gray-haired woman from corporate compliance, lifted her pen. Mason looked toward Noah first.
No retaliation.
Not against him. Not against any trainee who speaks up. The pen moved. Second, any worker on this floor can stop a line for a safety concern without losing pay while it's reviewed. The pen moved again. Third, no red tag gets removed by one signature. Not mine. Not management's. 2 signatures, safety copied, every time. He could have asked for an apology in front of everyone. He could have asked Brent to stand there and feel what he had felt. He could have turned the silence into a weapon. Instead, he turned it into a rule that might send more fathers home alive. Grace watched him with something deeper than admiration. Respect earned slowly, checked against evidence, and no longer hidden behind caution. The acting director signed the agreement on the inspection table. Noah was assigned a new mentor in safety maintenance. Cal, still bruised but walking, shook Mason's hand with both of his and could not get more than 2 words out. "Thank you." Mason only said, "Go home to your family tonight. That's enough." Later, in the break room, a small glass case was mounted beside the time clock. Inside lay the first cracked bolt Eli had held, the broken line 4 sample, and the old repair receipt from Mason's toolbox, the one with the 43-second warning written in pencil. Under them was a strip of paper in Eli's uneven handwriting. Small things matter. Workers passed it without jokes. Some touched the edge of the case. Some simply slowed down. Eli stood in front of it with Mason, his small hand, slipping into his father's rough one. "Do you hate them?" he asked. Mason looked through the glass at the bolt everyone had laughed at, and his thumb brushed the dented handle of the red toolbox. "No, son," he said. "I just hope they listen sooner next time." For a long moment, father and son stood together in the soft hum of a factory learning how to be honest, and the quiet around them was no longer shame, but grace, because dignity does not need to shout when truth has finally found a place to stand.